This is a homily for the 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading is from the prophet Amos, chapter 8, verses 4 to 7. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 16, verses 1 to 13. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. Once again, we are accompanying Jesus and his disciples on their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. In the 2010 movie The Way, Martin Sheen's character walks one of the great Christian pilgrimage routes known as the Camino. The destination of the Camino is Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain. It is the traditional burial place of the Apostle St. James. Martin Sheen made this interesting comment on his experience of pilgrimage. The pilgrimage is an equal journey inside as well as out, and the closer we get to the destination of the pilgrimage, in this case Santiago, the closer we get to who we are, and we begin to understand that our whole lives are pilgrimages. This is also true of the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It is not just a geographical journey from Galilee in the north to Jerusalem in the south. It is also an inner journey. Jesus is instructing his disciples about life in the kingdom of God. Luke's account of the journey to Jerusalem begins at chapter 9, verse 51, and takes us up to chapter 19, verse 27. It is the longest section of Luke's Gospel. Today's Gospel, taken from chapter 16, means that we have well and truly passed the midway point of the journey. As I have already pointed out, the Sunday lectionary devotes 19 weeks to what Jesus does and says on the way to Jerusalem. This Sunday, we are in the 13th Sunday of the journey. It's important to keep in mind that Jesus and the disciples are going to Jerusalem for the celebration of Passover. Fleming Rutledge reminds us of the importance of the Passover motif. The Passover and the Exodus are the shaping events of Hebrew history, and for Jews and Christians alike, they are the central images of God's activity. So much so that the earliest Christians immediately understood the crucifixion and resurrection as the new Passover and Exodus, the climax of the drama of deliverance. Each of the four evangelists sees the ministry of Jesus as a new and greater Exodus. However, we're not talking about a liberation from slavery in Egypt, but deliverance from other kinds of slavery. In today's Gospel, Jesus talks about being a slave to money. No servant can be the slave of two masters. He will either hate the first and love the second, or treat the first with respect and the second with scorn. You cannot be the slave both of God and of money. The first reading is taken from the prophet Amos, who lived in the 8th century BC. He was called to prophesy in the northern kingdom of Israel, which was enjoying an era of great economic prosperity. Amos is lampooning those who squirm with impatience during the Sabbath. Why? Well, because during the Sabbath they can't do any business. The Torah forbids doing work on the Sabbath day. These people see the Sabbath as a burden and a restraint to their pursuit of profit. As soon as the Sabbath is over, they can get back to money making by swindling and exploiting the poor. A key theme in Luke's Gospel is concern for the poor. I've spoken before about the Infancy Narrative functioning as an overture, sounding notes that will resonate throughout the entire Gospel. In her great hymn of praise, the Magnificat, Mary proclaims, "He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their heart. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty." In Luke's Gospel, Jesus begins his public ministry by returning to Nazareth and going to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. When he stood up to read, he was given the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. Unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to captives, sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim a year of the Lord's favour." He then rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the assistant, and sat down. The eyes of all were fixed on him, and he began to speak to them. "Today, this text has been fulfilled in your hearing." In other words, Jesus saw his own ministry in precisely those terms, bringing good news to the poor. When Jesus sent the disciples out ahead of him to all the towns and places where he intended to go, he tells them to travel lightly. Take no purse with you, no bag, no sandals. The fact that the disciples are travelling without money means that they are to trust in God and depend upon the generosity and hospitality of those to whom they are sent. It's interesting to compare Matthew's version of the Beatitudes with that of Luke. Matthew has, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," whereas Luke has, "Blessed are you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours." Matthew has spiritualized this beatitude, but Luke understands it quite literally. In Luke's version, Jesus continues, "Blessed are you who are hungry now. Woe to you who have your fill now. Blessed are you who weep now. Woe to you who laugh now. Blessed are you when people hate you, drive you out, abuse you. Woe to you when the world speaks well of you." What is happening here? Jesus is making it very clear that the new life of God's kingdom is a complete reversal of the world's values. The standards of the world are turned upside down. God deflates the pretensions of the rich and fills the hungry with good things. The New Testament scholar Tom Wright describes this great reversal in these words. It's an upside-down code, and perhaps, Jesus might have said, a right-way-up code instead of the upside-down ones people had been following. God is doing something quite new, as Jesus had emphasized in the synagogue at Nazareth in chapter 4. He is fulfilling his promises at last, and this will mean good news for all the people who haven't had any for a long time. The poor, the hungry, those who weep, those who are hated. Blessings on them. The parable of the rich fool concluded with the words, "So it is when someone stores up treasure for himself instead of becoming rich with regard to God." Several verses later, Jesus exhorts his disciples to sell your possessions and give alms. Get yourselves purses that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, that is where your heart will be too. Next Sunday, we'll hear the parable of Lazarus and the rich man who is so absorbed in his comfortable life that he fails to notice the poor beggar lying at his door. Joseph Fitzmyer offers this reflection on the poor in Luke's Gospel. They represent generically the neglected mass of humanity. They are not the servants of mammon. They are not piling up treasures for themselves, but are rather rich for God. The characteristic of the rich fool was that he felt no need of God, whereas the poor are those that do, and those to whom Jesus the prophet preaches. Luke Timothy Johnson puts it this way: the rich stand for those who have their consolation already in society and have no need of God's consolation. They therefore reject the prophet. The poor stand for all those who have been rejected on the basis of human standards, but are accepted by God. They in turn accept the prophet. The rich are those who have succumbed to what Clive Hamilton calls affluenza. Affluenza is a coined word derived from the two words affluence and influenza, suggesting that our relentless pursuit of affluence has become a disease. Hamilton offers this reflection: as a rule, no matter how much money people have, they feel they need more. Why else would people in rich countries such as Australia keep striving to become richer, often at the expense of their own happiness and that of their families? Even the mega-rich seem unable to accept that they have all they need, always comparing themselves unfavourably with their neighbours. Most people cling to the belief that more money means more happiness. Consider this contemporary parable. A rich industrialist on holidays in Mexico came across a fisherman standing by his boat playing the guitar. He asked the fisherman, "Why aren't you out fishing?" The fisherman replied, "Because I have got enough fish for today." "Why don't you catch some more?" "What would I do with them?" "You could earn more money. With that you could have a motor fixed to your boat and catch more fish. Then you would make enough money to buy nylon nets. These would bring you more fish and more money. Soon you would have enough money to buy 2 boats, maybe even a fleet of boats. Then you would be a rich man like me." "What would I do then?" "Then you could really enjoy life." "What do you think I'm doing right now?" Today we have another parable that is unique to Luke's Gospel. Whereas the parables of the Good Samaritan and the Prodigal Son, also unique to Luke's Gospel, are among the most popular of all the parables, the same cannot be said about today's parable. Jesus tells his disciples a parable about a rich man and one of his employees, or perhaps a slave or servant. The parable is often named the parable of the crafty manager or the dishonest steward. In verse 8, the steward or manager is called dishonest. But is his dishonesty in what he had done, and hence the reason why he is called before his master, or is he called dishonest because of what he does in the parable? We'll come to that in a moment. The British biblical scholar C.H. Dodd offers us this helpful insight into understanding parables. He writes, "The parable has the character of an argument in that it entices the hearer to a judgment upon the situation depicted and then challenges the hearer, directly or by implication, to apply that judgment to the matter in hand." So, step 1. How do you judge what has happened in this parable? And step 2, how does that judgment apply to the situation we're now talking about? So let's now follow those two steps as we turn to the parable. Firstly, how do you judge what has happened in the parable? The first two characters that we meet in the story are a rich man and his employee, or perhaps his slave. The Greek text of the New Testament calls the employee an oikonomos, which means an estate manager. The role of the oikonomos in a large household was one of great responsibility, but also one of wealth and prestige. In other words, he wasn't just a servant, but a trained, trusted, and duly empowered agent of his master. It was not uncommon for the estate manager to enjoy considerable autonomy in overseeing his master's affairs, and also to receive a considerable commission for his efforts. Certain charges are brought against the estate manager. Without probing the truth of the charge, the master decides to dismiss the manager because, we're told, he's squandered his employer's resources. The Greek verb that Luke uses for squandered is diaskopidzo. Today's parable follows immediately after the parable of the prodigal son, and this is the same verb that Luke uses when he tells us that the younger son left for a distant country and he squandered his money in loose living. It appears as though the manager is guilty of some form of mismanagement, either through fraud or incompetence. Since the manager neither denied the accusation nor attempted to defend himself, we must presume that he is guilty as charged. At the conclusion of the parable, the manager is referred to as dishonest. The word that Luke uses is adikia, which can be translated as injustice or unrighteousness. However, we're told that the master praised the dishonest manager for his astuteness. It's not entirely clear whether he is called dishonest for what he had done in the past or because of what he does in the parable. How does the manager react when he's given the sack? As we heard in the gospel, he says to himself, "Now that the master is taking the stewardship from me, what am I to do? Dig? I am not strong enough. Go begging? I should be too ashamed." Faced with a situation that may utterly ruin him, the estate manager devises a crafty scheme to feather his own nest, a shrewd measure designed to ensure a comfortable future. He summons two of his employer's debtors. To the first he says, "How much do you owe my master?" 100 jars of oil. The Greek text uses the word batos. Archaeological remains of jars marked batos indicate a capacity in the range of 34 to 40 litres. So we're talking about commercial quantities of oil. The manager said, "Let me offer you a generous discount. Make it 50 jars of oil." In other words, a 50% discount. That does sound astounding. The second debtor owes 100 sacks of wheat. As with the oil, we're also talking about commercial quantities of grain. "So," says the manager, "make it 80 sacks of wheat." The value of 100 sacks of wheat is about 2,500 denarii, and the value of 100 jars of oil is about 1,000 denarii. So each of the two debtors is given a discount of 500 denarii. 1 denarius is the equivalent of a day's wage for a labourer. What's happening here? Is the manager doing something dishonest? Is he defrauding his employer? Is he committing a crime? There are 3 possible answers to this question. The first possibility is that the manager did defraud his master by reducing the size of the debts. He is therefore dishonest and guilty of committing a crime. A second possibility is that the manager is not doing anything dishonest. In fact, he's acting righteously, and for this reason. The Torah forbids Jews to lend money at interest, but many people got round that by lending in kind, and oil and wheat were often used for this purpose. In this second scenario, the manager is simply deducting the amount of interest that had been charged contrary to Jewish law. The interest rate on oil was higher than that on wheat because oil can be more easily adulterated. And there is a third possibility. It was not uncommon for the estate manager to enjoy considerable autonomy in overseeing his master's affairs. He also received a considerable commission for his efforts. So in this third scenario, the manager simply deducted the amount of his own commission from the amount owing. This means that the manager is being opportunistic rather than dishonest. He forgoes his own commission to win goodwill that will serve him in his coming hour of need. The first of these three options seems more likely, because the other two require information or assumptions that are not provided in the parable. I have to tell you, though, that there is no consensus among New Testament scholars about which of these three scenarios is the correct one. However we understand the parable, we must remember that the master praised the dishonest steward for his astuteness. The word the Greek New Testament uses is phronimos, and that can be translated as astuteness or acting shrewdly, cleverly, prudently, sensibly, wisely, or smartly. It refers to practical wisdom. In this context, astuteness or acting shrewdly is probably the best translation. In each of the three scenarios we have considered, the manager acts shrewdly, and that is the key to understanding the parable. The manager responds to the crisis he finds himself in by acting shrewdly and astutely. He acts with flair and roguish intelligence in a time of crisis. So, the lesson of the parable. Disciples of Jesus must be as shrewd and as astute as the manager in their quest for the kingdom of God. And following on from that, as the manager used wealth to secure a place for himself, so should the disciples. In other words, let us be as shrewd and as astute in tending to our own spiritual well-being as we are in looking after our financial well-being. Let us grasp eagerly the opportunity to enter the kingdom of God with the same alacrity that the manager displayed by acting decisively to plan a comfortable future for himself once he was sacked. The German biblical scholar Joachim Jeremias agrees with the first of the three options we've looked at, and that is that the manager has acted fraudulently. He concludes that various attempts to whitewash the unjust steward have all failed. He notes that people have been shocked that the parable seems to present a criminal as a model. People would have expected Jesus to express strong disapproval at what the manager did, but he doesn't. In the words of Jeremias, instead of that, to their complete surprise, he praises the swindler. Jesus seems to be saying, "Are you indignant? Apply the lesson to yourselves. You are in the same position as that steward who saw disaster, his life in ruins. But the crisis that threatens you, in fact you are already involved in it, is incomparably more terrible." That man realized that the situation was critical. He did not let things drift. He acted at the last minute before the threatening disaster overtook him, fraudulently and unscrupulously, but boldly, resolutely and prudently, and gave himself a fresh start. For you too, the challenge of the hour demands prudence. Everything is at stake. Over the years, we have become increasingly aware of the harmful effects of smoking. And for that reason, cigarette packets carry a mandatory warning because smoking is a health hazard. If smoking is a serious threat to our health, what about money? Money can so often become a hazard to our spiritual health. Perhaps we should print a warning on banknotes, just as we now print warnings on cigarette packets. Well, in one sense, we already do. You may be surprised to learn that the English word money comes from the Latin word for warning. Let me say a few words about the etymology of our English word money. The statue that you can see here is a statue of the Roman goddess Juno. In Roman mythology, Juno was the wife of Jupiter and queen of the gods. She was also patron goddess of the city of Rome. Just as Catholics address the Mother of Jesus by many different titles, such as Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Perpetual Help, and so on, well, in the same way, ancient Romans had many different titles for Juno. One of her many titles was Juno Moneta, which translates into English as Juno the Warner. Where did that name come from? The temple of Juno was situated on the Capitoline Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome. For reasons I can't explain, money was coined in her temple for over 4 centuries. So part of the temple was the mint. Let me show you where we are in modern-day Rome. One of the prominent features in Rome today is the Victor Emmanuel II National Monument. It was built to honour the first king of a unified Italy, Victor Emmanuel. Romans often facetiously refer to the monument as the wedding cake. Just behind the monument is the church of Santa Maria in Araceli. As you can see, you ascend a steep flight of steps to enter the church. The church is located on the Capitoline Hill, and it's built on the site where the temple of Juno once stood. In 390 BC, a band of Gauls had secretly gained entry into Rome and were scaling the walls of the Capitoline Hill. Presumably, they were seeking to plunder the mint. It was night time. The soldiers who were supposed to be on guard were all sleeping. As the invading Gauls silently scaled the wall, the geese that were sacred to Juno started squawking, and that alerted the guards, who then repulsed the invaders. Juno was thereafter known as Juno the Warner, Juno Moneta in Latin, she who gives warning of imminent danger. And so the product of the mint, coins, bear the name, or rather the title, of the goddess, Juno Moneta. Here you can see a Roman coin bearing this title, M-O-N-E-T-A, Moneta the Warner. So today's gospel also warns us about money. You cannot be the slave both of God and of money.